do we determine how developed a country is? Well, we're going to look at something called the HDI, also known as the Human Development Index. This is going to be a number from 0 to 1 that lets us know how developed a country is. In order to get that number, we look at things like the life expectancy of people living in that country. We are also going to look at the literacy rates of people living there, which means how many people can read and write. We're going to look at school enrollment, so how many students of school age are actually students? Are they enrolled in school? And then we're going to look at the GDP, particularly the GDP per capita. Now, if you remember, the GDP per capita means basically how much money does a country have based on all of the goods and services they have produced in a year, and we take all of that money and we divide it up per person. So if I did divide all that money up per person, how much would each person hypothetically have? Let's take a look at the 3 different types of economic activities. The first one we are going to start with is primary. Primary economic activities are typically going to be seen in less developed countries. Things that would fall under this category would be anything in agriculture, mining, fishing, forestry, basically anything where you're using your hands outside. The second level of economic activity we're going to look at is secondary. In the secondary level, we're going to see manufacturing jobs. So people that are working in a manufacturing plant or an assembly line, that's going to fall under a secondary category. Usually these people are assembling raw materials. Finally, that brings us to our tertiary level of economic activity. Tertiary is the highest level of economic activity. We are mostly going to see this in more developed countries. Jobs in this sector are going to be service related, so that could be something like working a retail job at the mall, being a lawyer, being an educator, like someone you might know. Rostow's modernization model, and you might be asking yourself, hey, why aren't all countries economically developed? Why did some of them get left behind? Why haven't they moved through those stages? Well, there are a lot of barriers out there to economic development. We're going to start by looking at some social barriers. Things like high birth rates, low life expectancy, lack of access to healthcare, lack of access to education. Then we've got diseases around the world like malaria, HIV and AIDS, tuberculosis. Then there's women's rights issues. A lot of countries don't have a lot of women's rights. Poverty. Poverty and hunger are huge barriers to economic development. Why worry about economically developing when you are hungry, you can't eat? Political corruption would be another one. Economic development, totally awesome, right? There are some costs to it. Things like consumption of natural resources. We see an increased production in waste and noise and air pollution. Tourism. Is it good or is it bad? Well, let's take a look at some of the good. Tourism brings in a lot of money. Tourism can create jobs. It also can lead to some areas of development. What are some of the bad sides of tourism, though? It's often a strain on the local economy. Usually those jobs I talked about, very low paying.
Audio Jungle.
Also, a lot of that money doesn't go right back into that local economy. Usually it goes to big companies or even a corrupt government. On top of that, we usually see a really harsh contrast from the very rich to the very poor. Export processing zones are often set up in developing countries to attract international companies with duty-free incentives, like the Mexican maquiladores. And that brings us to the end, guys.